The engagement announcement was supposed to run in tomorrow's paper, but Andrew Hawkins' bride-to-be had just walked out. 6 months to marry or forfeit his inheritance. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, there's a Celeste Crawford here. She says you'll want to hear her offer." He looked up into the eyes of the financial analyst he'd unknowingly gotten fired. "1 year," she said. "A business arrangement, but I have conditions." Andrew Hawkins stood in his penthouse office, staring at the engagement announcement that would never see print. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to secure his future, he'd just lost it entirely. His grandmother Eleanor's will was crystal clear. Marry within 6 months of her death, or watch the Hawkins fortune slip through his fingers to his cousin Sebastian. The door opened without ceremony. Andrew turned, expecting his assistant Marcus with another sympathetic look and strong coffee. Instead, he found himself face to face with a woman whose presence commanded the room despite her understated appearance. Celeste Crawford stood in the doorway, wearing a suit that spoke of quality on a budget. Her natural hair swept into a professional twist that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. Her warm brown eyes held an intelligence that made Andrew suddenly aware he was being assessed, and possibly found wanting. "Miss Crawford." He straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. "I wasn't expecting—" "No, you wouldn't be." Her voice carried a slight rasp that suggested long nights and strong coffee. She stepped into the office with the confident stride of someone who belonged in boardrooms, despite being unceremoniously ejected from her last one. "You signed the papers that eliminated my position 3 months ago. Cost-cutting measure, I believe it was called." The words hit him like ice water. Andrew prided himself on knowing his business inside and out, but lately, he'd been signing whatever his father's old advisors placed in front of him. "I'm sorry, I don't recall." "Of course you don't." Celeste moved closer to his desk, and he caught a subtle hint of vanilla and determination. An intoxicating combination he hadn't expected. Andrew Hawkins doesn't concern himself with individual casualties of corporate efficiency. "But I'm not here for an apology." She reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, placing it on his mahogany desk with the precision of someone who'd built her career on attention to detail. The document was handwritten in careful script, every word deliberate. "A contract," she said simply. 1 year. A business arrangement that solves both our problems. Andrew leaned forward, his pulse quickening despite himself. This close, he could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw that spoke of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts. Yet her composure never wavered. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Marriage." The word hung between them like a challenge. Not love, not romance, a mutually beneficial partnership. "You need a wife to secure your inheritance. I need financial stability to ensure my niece can finish her senior year at Dalton Prep and attend Columbia in the fall." The boldness of it stole his breath. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, usually money, attention, or access, here was someone offering a straightforward exchange. No pretense of affection, no manipulation disguised as devotion. "And what makes you think I'd be interested in such an arrangement?" Andrew asked. Though they both knew his options, had just walked out with Raven. Celeste's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because you're desperate and I'm practical. Your ex-fiancé just proved that love built on inheritance clauses crumbles the moment the money's threatened. What I'm offering is honest." She was right, and they both knew it. Raven had been beautiful, socially connected, and absolutely perfect on paper. She'd also fled the moment Eleanor's will reading revealed the marriage requirement, claiming she wouldn't be used as a pawn in family games. The truth was simpler. She wanted the lifestyle Andrew's money provided, not the responsibility of actually earning it. "You said you have conditions," Andrew said, sliding the contract closer. 3 of them. Celeste counted on elegant fingers that bore no jewelry except a simple silver ring on her right hand. "First, separate bedrooms. This is a business arrangement, and I intend to maintain professional boundaries." Andrew nodded, ignoring the unexpected sting of disappointment. "Second, I will be treated with respect in all public and private interactions. No patronizing, No dismissive behavior. No treating me like hired help who happens to share your last name. Agreed. The fact that she felt the need to specify this made him wonder what kind of men she'd encountered in corporate America. Third, Celeste's voice softened slightly, revealing the first crack in her professional armor. My niece Phoenix's college fund is guaranteed, regardless of what happens between us. 4 years at Columbia, fully funded. That money is protected, even if this arrangement ends badly. There it was, the vulnerability beneath the steel. This wasn't about her own security. This was about protecting the only family she had left. Phoenix is lucky to have you, Andrew said quietly. Something flickered across Celeste's face. Surprise, perhaps at his genuine tone. She's 16 and brilliant, and deserves every opportunity I can give her. This arrangement ensures she gets them. Andrew reached for his Mont Blanc pen, then hesitated. What about you? What do you get out of this, besides solving my inheritance problem? Breathing room, Celeste admitted. Time to rebuild my career without worrying about rent. A reference from Hawkins Industries that might open doors the Morrison scandal closed. And she paused, and for the first time, her carefully controlled expression wavered. The chance to prove I'm worth more than the lies Douglas Morrison spread about my work. The pain in her voice was quickly masked, but Andrew caught it. Someone had hurt her professionally, damaged her reputation in ways that went beyond a simple firing. He found himself wanting to know more, to understand what had put those shadows in her remarkable eyes. Their fingers touched as he reached for the contract, and an unexpected jolt of awareness shot through him. Celeste pulled back quickly, but not before he saw her pupils dilate slightly. Professional arrangement or not, there was chemistry here neither of them had anticipated. 1 year, she repeated, her voice slightly breathless. 1 year, he agreed, signing his name with flourishes that belied the hammering of his heart. As Celeste added her signature, Andrew found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the graceful line of her neck, the way her teeth caught her lower lip in concentration. This was supposed to be business, but every instinct he possessed was responding to her with an intensity that had nothing to do with inheritance clauses. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by the rapid click of approaching heels. Raven's voice echoed down the hallway. Andrew, darling, I've reconsidered. We need to talk. Celeste looked up from the contract and their eyes met. Seems like your timing is perfect, she murmured. Seems like it is, Andrew replied, but he wasn't thinking about Raven's return. He was thinking about the woman across from his desk, who just agreed to marry him, for the most honest reasons anyone ever had. The office door burst open and Raven swept in like a force of nature. All platinum blonde hair, designer clothing, and barely contained panic. She stopped short when she saw Celeste, her perfectly contoured features shifting from confusion to something approaching alarm. Andrew, who is this? Raven's voice carried the imperious tone of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Andrew stood slowly, suddenly aware that everything was about to change. Raven, meet my fiancé. Have you ever had to make a deal with someone who once hurt you? What would your conditions be? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The color drained from Raven's face as she processed the implications. That's impossible. You can't be engaged. We only broke up 3 hours ago. Actually, Celeste said, rising from her chair with fluid grace. The announcement went out 20 minutes ago. I believe yours was pulled from tomorrow's paper. The subtle jab hit its mark. Raven's composure cracked visibly. Andrew, this is ridiculous. You can't marry some what? Andrew's voice carried a warning that made even Raven pause. Celeste stepped forward, close enough that Andrew caught that intoxicating vanilla scent again. Some practical woman who won't run when the going gets tough, she suggested sweetly. You're right, it must be a novel concept. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Andrew found himself admiring Celeste's composure under fire. She faced Raven's designer hostility with the calm confidence of someone who'd earned her place in the world rather than inherited it. This won't work, Raven said, desperation creeping into her voice. Your grandmother's will requires a real marriage, not some business arrangement. Lucky for us, Celeste replied. Real is exactly what we intend to make it. Andrew felt something shift inside his chest as he watched Celeste handle Raven's attack with grace and intelligence. When she'd walked into his office, he'd seen a solution to his problems. Now he was beginning to see something much more dangerous. A woman who might actually be worth falling for. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, as Celeste turned to look at him with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed walls, Andrew Hawkins found himself wondering if his grandmother's final gift hadn't been the inheritance clause after all. Maybe it had been Celeste Crawford. The media circus that followed their engagement announcement was unlike anything Celeste had experienced. Within hours, photographers camped outside her modest Brooklyn apartment, forcing her to accept Andrew's offer to move into the penthouse guest wing immediately. "This is insane," Phoenix muttered, peering through the curtains at the cluster of paparazzi below. At 16, Phoenix Crawford Baptiste possessed the kind of natural beauty that would make modeling agencies weep. But her real power lay in her razor-sharp intelligence and complete inability to be impressed by wealth. "Aunt C, you sure about this billionaire thing? He could be a serial killer." "Serial killers don't usually inherit family empires," Celeste replied, though privately she wondered if she'd made the right choice. The elevator ride to Andrew's penthouse had been torture. 43 floors of awkward silence and hyper-awareness of his presence beside her. The penthouse doors opened to reveal Andrew waiting in the foyer, and Celeste's breath caught. Gone was the formal business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that emphasized his athletic build. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and the vulnerability in his blue eyes made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Phoenix," he said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "I've heard a lot about you." Phoenix sized him up with the brutal honesty only teenagers could manage. "Yeah, like what?" "That you're brilliant enough to get into Columbia early admission. That you've been raising your aunt as much as she's been raising you. And that if I hurt her, you'll probably find creative ways to make me regret it." Despite herself, Phoenix's lips twitched. "I've got 2.3 million TikTok followers. I could destroy your reputation in about 10 minutes. "Good to know I'm marrying into a family that doesn't mess around," Andrew replied with genuine respect. Celeste felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He was treating Phoenix like an equal, not dismissing her as a difficult teenager. Most men couldn't handle Phoenix's protective intensity, but Andrew seemed genuinely charmed by it. "Let me show you to your rooms," Andrew said, leading them through the sprawling penthouse. The guest wing was larger than their entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of Manhattan. Celeste's suite included a sitting area, walk-in closet, and marble bathroom that made her feel like she'd stepped into a luxury hotel. "There's a study down the hall if you need space to work," Andrew mentioned, hovering in the doorway. "And the kitchen is fully stocked. Maria, my housekeeper, can prepare whatever you like, but I know you value your independence." He was trying so hard to make her comfortable, and the consideration touched something deep inside her that she'd thought was safely buried. "Thank you. This is more than generous." Their eyes met across the beautiful room, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Andrew took a step forward, and Celeste's pulse quickened. For a moment, she forgot this was supposed to be business. "Aunt C, where do you want me to put your lucky coffee mug?" Phoenix's voice from the hallway broke the spell. Andrew stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner's at 7 if you'd like to join me." After he left, Celeste sank onto the sumptuous bed, trying to steady her racing heart. This was supposed to be simple. A year-long arrangement to solve both their problems. She hadn't counted on Andrew Hawkins being genuinely kind, or devastatingly attractive, or looking at her like she was something precious rather than purchased. Phoenix appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Okay, spill. What's really going on here?" "I told you, it's a business arrangement." "Business arrangements don't make people look at each other like they want to tear each other's clothes off." "Phoenix, I'm 16, not blind." Phoenix flopped into the sitting area's plush armchair. "He's hot, rich, and he didn't patronize me. I can see the appeal. But Aunt C, what happens when this fake marriage starts feeling real?" That was exactly what Celeste was afraid of. Dinner proved to be another exercise in unexpected intimacy. Andrew had dismissed the staff, choosing to cook himself, something that clearly surprised Phoenix as much as it did Celeste. "You actually know how to cook?" Phoenix asked, watching him expertly plate pan-seared salmon with risotto. "Eleanor, my grandmother, insisted I learn," said a man who couldn't feed himself was barely a man at all. Andrew's voice carried warm affection when he spoke of Eleanor. "She also taught me that wealth should never be an excuse for helplessness." "Smart woman," Celeste murmured, accepting the plate he handed her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and that familiar jolt of awareness shot through her. "She would have liked you," Andrew said quietly, his gaze holding hers. "She always said the most valuable people are those who've earned their place in the world." Over dinner, conversation flowed easier than Celeste had expected. Andrew asked Phoenix thoughtful questions about her Columbia plans, and Phoenix gradually warmed to him, especially when he admitted to struggling with organic chemistry despite his Harvard MBA. "I could tutor you," Phoenix offered impulsively. "I'm basically a chemistry genius. I might take you up on that," Andrew replied with a grin that transformed his entire face. Celeste watched this interaction with growing confusion. She'd expected polite tolerance at best, calculated charm at worst. Instead, Andrew seemed genuinely interested in Phoenix's thoughts and opinions. He listened when she spoke, remembered details from their earlier conversation, and treated her academic achievements with the respect they deserved. "So what's the deal with your evil cousin?" Phoenix asked with characteristic directness. "Sebastian something?" Andrew's expression darkened. "Sebastian Hawkins Rothschild. He's been challenging Eleanor's will from the moment it was read. Claims the marriage requirement is archaic and unenforceable." "Is it?" Celeste asked, suddenly worried. "Judge Lightfoot doesn't think so. She was Eleanor's best friend and helped draft the will. But Sebastian has good voyeurs and old grudges." Andrew's jaw tightened. "He's always felt entitled to the family fortune. The fact that Eleanor left everything to me instead of splitting it between us has made him vindictive." "What's his angle?" Phoenix asked, clearly intrigued by the family drama. "He's arguing that Eleanor was mentally incompetent when she wrote the will, that the marriage clause proves she'd lost touch with reality." Andrew's voice carried bitter frustration. "Never mind that she was sharper than any of us right until the end." Celeste reached across the table instinctively, covering his hand with hers. "We won't let him win." The moment the words left her mouth, she realized how they sounded, like a real partnership, not a business arrangement. Andrew's eyes widened slightly, and she saw something vulnerable and hopeful flicker across his features. "We?" he asked softly. "I made a deal," Celeste said, not moving her hand from his. "I intend to honor it." Phoenix cleared her throat loudly. "And on that note, I'm going to go explore this massive apartment and pretend I didn't just watch you two have a moment." After Phoenix left, the air between them crackled with tension. Andrew turned his hand palm up beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. His thumb traced gentle circles on her skin, and Celeste felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," Andrew replied, his voice rough with emotion. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by Marcus's voice. "Mr. Hawkins? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have visitors." Andrew sighed, reluctantly releasing her hand. It's probably Sebastian's lawyers again. But when they reached the foyer, they found something worse. Raven, impeccably dressed and armed with a photographer from Society Pages magazine. "Andrew, darling," Raven purred, posing provocatively for the camera. "I thought your readers would love to hear about our tumultuous love story, how we're working through our problems, how deeply we still care for each other." The photographer's flash went off repeatedly as Raven draped herself over Andrew's arm. Celeste felt a surge of something that couldn't possibly be jealousy, followed by a cold wash of realization. If these photos ran, they would undermine everything she and Andrew were trying to build. "I'm sorry," Andrew said firmly, extricating himself from Raven's grip. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding. My fiancé and I—" "Your pretend fiancé?" Raven's voice turned venomous. "Please, Andrew, we both know this is just another business deal. You can't possibly expect people to believe you're in love with her." The words hit Celeste like physical blows, Every insecurity she'd ever felt about her place in wealthy circles, every doubt about her worthiness, came flooding back. She was about to excuse herself when Andrew stepped forward, his entire demeanor shifting into something fierce and protective. "You're absolutely right," he said, his voice carrying deadly calm. "I can't expect people to believe I'm in love with Celeste." Celeste's heart plummeted, but Andrew wasn't finished. "I can't expect them to believe it, because what I feel for her is so far beyond love that there isn't a word for it yet." His eyes found hers across the room, and the intensity in them stole her breath. "She's brilliant, brave, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with what you can buy. She's building a real life with real purpose, not just waiting for someone else's money to give her meaning." The photographer's camera clicked frantically as Andrew moved to Celeste's side, his arms sliding around her waist with possessive certainty. "My grandmother always said the measure of a person isn't what they inherit, but what they build," Andrew continued, his gaze never leaving Celeste's face. "Celeste Crawford has built a family, a career, and a character that puts the rest of us to shame. So no, I don't expect anyone to believe I'm lucky enough to be loved by someone like her. But I'm going to spend every day proving I'm worthy of the chance." The silence in the room was deafening. Even Raven seemed stunned by the raw honesty in Andrew's voice. Celeste felt tears threatening, overwhelmed by the fierce protection and genuine admiration in his words. "That's quite a performance," Raven finally managed, but her voice lacked its earlier venom. "It wasn't a performance," Celeste said quietly, her eyes still locked with Andrew's. "And that's what you'll never understand." After Raven and the photographer left, defeated and empty-handed, Andrew and Celeste stood in the foyer's golden light, the weight of his words hanging between them. "Did you mean it?" Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. Every word. His hand cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness, and Celeste felt her last defenses crumbling. This was supposed to be business. It was supposed to be safe. But as Andrew's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and his eyes searched hers with desperate hope, Celeste realized that falling for Andrew Hawkins might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever done, and she was already halfway there. 3 weeks into their arrangement, exactly halfway to Eleanor's 6-month deadline, Celeste had fallen into a routine that felt dangerously close to domestic bliss. Morning coffee with Andrew, while Phoenix got ready for school. Evening meals, where they discussed everything from market trends to Phoenix's college essays. And stolen moments of conversation that had nothing to do with their contract and everything to do with genuine connection. The problem was that none of it felt fake anymore. "You're brooding again," Phoenix observed, perching on the edge of Celeste's desk in the penthouse study. "Is it the fake husband or the real feelings?" Celeste looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing Andrew's quarterly reports. Working as his unofficial financial consultant had given her intimate knowledge of his business operations and growing respect for his strategic mind. "I'm not brooding. I'm analyzing market projections." "Uh-huh." Phoenix's knowing smirk was infuriating. "And that's why you keep staring at the photo on his desk?" Celeste's gaze involuntarily drifted to the silver-framed picture Andrew kept beside his computer. Eleanor Hawkins at age 30, radiant in her wedding dress, but with steel in her eyes that spoke of a woman who wouldn't be diminished by wealth or status. "She was beautiful," Celeste murmured, "and brilliant, and fierce, and everything Andrew thinks you are." Phoenix's voice gentled. "Aunt C, you know it's okay to let yourself be happy, right?" Before Celeste could respond, Andrew appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up after a long day of meetings. The sight of him, relaxed and slightly disheveled, sent warmth spiraling through her chest. "Ladies," he said with a tired smile, "how was everyone's day?" "Boring," Phoenix replied. "School is basically intellectual torture when you already know everything they're trying to teach you." Spoken like a true Crawford, Andrew said with affection that made Celeste's heart skip. "Your aunt was probably the same way." "I was not arrogant," Celeste protested. "No, just brilliant and impatient with people who couldn't keep up," Andrew replied, moving behind her chair. His hands settled on her shoulders, and she had to bite back a sigh at the gentle pressure of his massage. I read your analysis of the Henderson merger. Your insights were extraordinary. The praise combined with his touch made concentration impossible. Celeste leaned back slightly, allowing herself to enjoy the warmth of his hands working the tension from her neck and shoulders. Get a room, Phoenix muttered, but she was grinning. I'm going to my actual room to video call some friends who don't make me feel like a third wheel in my own living situation. After Phoenix left, Andrew's hands stilled on Celeste's shoulders. The study felt suddenly intimate, filled with golden evening light and the weight of unspoken possibilities. You're tense, he observed, his voice lower than usual. It's been a long day, Celeste replied, acutely aware of his proximity. His thumb found a particularly tight knot at the base of her neck, and she couldn't suppress a small sound of relief. Better? Andrew asked, his breath warm against her ear. Celeste turned in her chair, bringing them face to face. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble that made him look younger and more vulnerable. You look tired, she said softly, her hand rising without conscious thought to touch his cheek. Andrew leaned into her palm, his eyes fluttering closed. Long day of Sebastian's lawyers, trying to prove our marriage is fraudulent. What did they want to know? Everything. How we met, when we fell in love, what our future plans are. His eyes opened, reading hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I realized I know the answers to all of those questions, even though they weren't supposed to matter. Andrew. I know, he said quickly. I know this complicates everything. But Celeste, what happened downstairs with Raven, what I said, I meant every word. The vulnerability in his voice undid her. This powerful, wealthy man who could have anyone was looking at her like she held his entire world in her hands. I meant what I said too, she whispered. About it not being a performance. Andrew's hand covered hers, where it rested against his cheek. Then maybe we should stop pretending this is just business. The words hung between them, like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Celeste knew that stepping over this line would change everything, would make their arrangement infinitely more complicated and potentially devastating. But as Andrew's thumb traced across her knuckles and his blue eyes searched hers with desperate hope, she realized she was already lost. The contract said, separate bedrooms, she said, her voice barely audible. It did, Andrew agreed, leaning closer until their foreheads almost touched. It didn't say anything about separate hearts. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent text. Andrew glanced at it and swore softly. What is it? Judge Lightfoot wants to see us. Tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. Andrew's expression darkened. Sebastian must have escalated his challenge. The moment shattered, reality intruding on their fragile intimacy. Celeste pulled back, immediately missing the warmth of his touch. We should prepare, she said, trying to regain her professional composure. Celeste. Andrew caught her hand as she started to rise. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they try to prove or disprove, I want you to know, this thing between us, it's real for me, completely real. The next morning, Judge Harmony Lightfoot's chambers felt like a courtroom despite the elegant furnishings and fresh flowers. Eleanor's closest friend was a formidable woman in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Sebastian Hawkins Rothschild sat across from them with his legal team, his perfectly groomed appearance and smug expression making Celeste's skin crawl. Beside him sat Raven, looking every inch the grieving almost bride. This is highly irregular, Judge Lightfoot began, her voice carrying decades of judicial authority. But given the nature of the accusations, I'm willing to hear Mr. Sebastian's concerns about the validity of this marriage. Sebastian's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, stood immediately. Your Honor, our investigation has revealed that this so-called engagement is nothing more than a business transaction designed to circumvent the legitimate intentions of Eleanor Hawkins' will. That's a serious accusation, Judge Lightfoot replied coolly. What evidence do you have? Miss Crawford was terminated from her position at Morrison & Associates just 3 months ago under suspicious circumstances. She was facing significant financial pressure, including her ward's private school tuition and upcoming college expenses. The attorney consulted her notes with theatrical precision. Mr. Hawkins, meanwhile, had just been publicly dumped by his legitimate fiancée due to the inheritance requirements. Celeste felt heat flood her cheeks, but Andrew's hand found hers under the table, steady and reassuring. Furthermore, the attorney continued, witnesses report that their engagement was announced mere hours after Ms. Raven Blackwood ended her relationship with Mr. Hawkins. The timing is suspiciously convenient. Ms. Blackwood, Judge Lightfoot addressed Raven directly. You were engaged to Mr. Hawkins for how long? 8 months, Raven replied, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. We were planning our wedding when Eleanor's will was read. The inheritance clause, it felt like being reduced to a business transaction. I couldn't bear the idea that Andrew might be marrying me just for money. The irony was staggering, given that Raven had never showed interest in Andrew beyond his bank account. And yet you believe he's now marrying Ms. Crawford for exactly that reason. Judge Lightfoot's tone was skeptical. I know he is, Sebastian interjected. Andrew has always been impulsive and entitled. When faced with losing his inheritance, he clearly found the most desperate woman he could manipulate into helping him. Andrew's grip on Celeste's hand tightened, and she could feel his anger radiating outward. But before he could speak, she squeezed back, silently asking him to let her handle this. Your Honor, Celeste said, rising smoothly. May I address these accusations? Judge Lightfoot nodded, her expression unreadable. It's true that I was facing financial difficulties when I approached Andrew. Celeste began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It's also true that our arrangement began as a business transaction. But what Mr. Sebastian and his legal team seem unable to understand is that business transactions between honest people often evolve into something more. She looked directly at Sebastian, letting him see the steel in her spine. I'm not the desperate woman Andrew manipulated. I'm the woman who saw past his wealth to the man underneath. The man who cooks dinner because his grandmother taught him that service isn't beneath anyone. The man who treats my 16-year-old niece with more respect than most adults show her. The man who stood up to photographers and social climbers to defend my honor when he had nothing to gain from it. Celeste turned to Judge Lightfoot, her voice growing stronger. Yes, this started as a contract, but I challenge anyone in this room to spend 3 weeks watching Andrew Hawkins be genuinely kind, brilliantly strategic, and completely unpretentious, and not fall at least a little bit in love. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Sebastian's attorney seemed momentarily stunned by Celeste's passionate honesty. Mr. Hawkins, Judge Lightfoot said quietly. Do you have anything to add? Andrew stood, still holding Celeste's hand. Only that Eleanor always said the best gifts come disguised as problems. I thought the inheritance clause was a burden. I was wrong. It brought me Celeste. He turned to face Sebastian directly. You can challenge the will all you want, cousin, but you can't challenge what's real. And what Celeste and I have, it's the most real thing I've ever experienced. Judge Lightfoot studied them both for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I knew Eleanor Hawkins for 40 years. She was many things, brilliant, stubborn, occasionally manipulative, but she was never cruel. The inheritance clause wasn't punishment, Mr. Sebastian, it was protection. Sebastian's face flushed. Protection from what? From men who see women as acquisitions rather than partners, from marriages built on greed rather than mutual respect. Judge Lightfoot's gaze softened as she looked at Andrew and Celeste. Eleanor wanted to ensure that whoever inherited the family fortune would understand its true value, not as a means to power, but as a responsibility to others. She stood, her decision clear in her bearing. This marriage, regardless of how it began, demonstrates exactly the kind of partnership Eleanor hoped to see. The inheritance clause stands as written. Sebastian shot to his feet. This isn't over. Actually, Judge Lightfoot replied with a slight smile. It is. And Sebastian, next time you want to challenge Eleanor's judgment, remember that she saw through your character long before you revealed it to the rest of us. As Sebastian and his team filed out in defeat, Celeste felt a mixture of relief and terror. They'd won this battle, but the war for her heart was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Andrew pulled her into a quiet alcove. his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for defending us. For seeing past the money to who I really am." "Thank you for being worth seeing," Celeste replied. Andrew's thumbs traced the curves of her cheekbones, and she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes: desire, tenderness, and the terrifying recognition that they'd passed the point of no return. "Celeste," he whispered, leaning closer, "I need you to know." "Uncle Andrew, Aunt Celeste!" Phoenix's voice cut through the moment as she bounded up the courthouse steps, having ditched school to support them. "Did we win? Please tell me we destroyed Sebastian and his evil lawyer lady." Andrew stepped back with a rueful smile, but his eyes promised they would finish this conversation later. "We won," Celeste confirmed, accepting Phoenix's fierce hug. "Good," Phoenix declared, "because I was already planning how to ruin him on social media if he tried to break up my family." My family. The words hit Celeste like a revelation. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the three of them had become exactly that, a family. Not bound by blood or legal contracts, but by choice, respect, and growing love. That evening, as they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and Phoenix's victory dance around the penthouse, Celeste caught Andrew watching her with an expression of such tender devotion that it took her breath away. This was supposed to be temporary, a business arrangement with clear boundaries and defined endings. But as Andrew's eyes promised her things that had nothing to do with contracts, and everything to do with forever, Celeste realized that the most dangerous thing about falling for Andrew Hawkins wasn't the risk of getting her heart broken. It was the growing certainty that she was ready to give it to him completely. That night, after Phoenix had finally stopped celebrating and gone to bed, Celeste found herself standing on the penthouse terrace, Manhattan glittering below like scattered diamonds. The evening air was warm against her skin, carrying the distant sounds of the city that never slept. She'd changed from her courthouse attire into a flowing emerald dress that Phoenix had insisted she buy. "Because you need to stop dressing like you're apologizing for taking up space," her wise niece had declared. Tonight, with victory singing in her veins and Andrew's words echoing in her heart, Celeste finally understood what Phoenix meant. "I was hoping I'd find you out here." Andrew's voice, soft and warm, made her turn. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, and looked utterly gorgeous in the moonlight streaming across the terrace. But it was the expression in his eyes, tender, hungry, and completely focused on her, that made her pulse skip. "I needed air," she said, though what she really needed was distance from the intensity building between them. Today was life-changing, Andrew finished, moving to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not touching. "Not yet." "The legal challenge is over," Celeste said, trying to maintain some semblance of practicality. "Sebastian can't threaten the inheritance anymore." "Is that what you think today was about?" Andrew turned to face her fully, his blue eyes searching hers. "The inheritance?" Celeste's breath caught. They both knew the inheritance had stopped mattering weeks ago, replaced by something infinitely more valuable and terrifying. "Andrew, she began, but he stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. 3 weeks ago, you walked into my office with a business proposition," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Tonight, you stood in a courtroom and defended what we have with such passion that you made me believe in love again." The vulnerability in his voice undid her. "I wasn't defending a contract. I was defending us." "I know." His other hand settled at her waist, drawing her closer until she could feel his heartbeat against her palms. "Celeste, I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with inheritance clauses or business arrangements. You've become essential to me in ways I never thought possible." She looked up into his face, seeing past the wealth and privilege to the man who cooked dinner for her family, who treated Phoenix like she mattered, who stood up to his own social circle to defend Celeste's honor. "You've become essential to me too," she whispered. The words seemed to unleash something in Andrew. His hands framed her face as he leaned down, his lips hovering just above hers. "If we do this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "There's no going back to just business. No more separate bedrooms. No more pretending this is temporary." "Good," Celeste breathed, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. "I'm tired of pretending." Their lips met in a kiss that shattered every carefully constructed wall between them. Andrew's mouth was warm and insistent, tasting of wine and promises, and Celeste felt herself melting into him with a surrender that was both terrifying and inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "Celeste," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "I want to show you how you make me feel. How grateful I am that you saw past everything else to find me." Without waiting for her response, he took her hand and led her back inside, through the penthouse to his private suite. Celeste's heart hammered as she realized what they were about to cross. But she felt no hesitation. This beautiful, complex man had become her anchor, and she was ready to let him know just how completely he'd captured her heart. Andrew's bedroom was a study in understated luxury, but Celeste barely noticed the decor. Her entire focus was on the man before her, whose hands trembled slightly as he reached for her. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. Instead of answering with words, Celeste reached up to begin unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the enormity of the moment. Andrew's breath hitched as she pushed the fabric aside, her palms splaying across the warm expanse of his chest. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said softly. What followed was a dance of discovery that felt both new and inevitable. Andrew worshipped her, with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, his hands and lips mapping every curve with such tenderness that she felt precious beyond measure. When he whispered her name against her throat, his voice breaking with emotion, Celeste understood that this wasn't just physical attraction. It was the complete surrender of two souls who'd found their perfect match. Time seemed suspended as they came together in perfect harmony, their bodies finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. In Andrew's arms, Celeste felt herself transform from the guarded woman who'd walked into his office to someone capable of absolute trust, absolute love. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through the windows, Andrew traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Not because of any contract or arrangement, but because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Celeste turned in his arms, studying his face in the silver light. "I love you too, completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably." Andrew's smile was radiant. "No more separate bedrooms?" "Definitely no more separate bedrooms," Celeste confirmed. Laughing softly, they made love again as dawn painted the sky pink and gold. Slower this time, savoring every touch and kiss as if they had all the time in the world. And as Andrew held her close, murmuring words of love and devotion against her hair, Celeste realized that somewhere between a business proposition and a passionate defense in a courtroom, she'd found exactly what she'd given up hoping for, a love that saw her completely and cherished every piece. The sound of Phoenix's voice in the hallway the next morning broke through their intimate cocoon. "Uncle Andrew? Aunt Celeste? Please tell me you're decent because I'm making pancakes and I need to know if I should make extra for the lovesick billionaire who finally got his act together." Andrew groaned against Celeste's shoulder, making her laugh. "She knows," Celeste said, not even trying to hide her satisfaction. "Phoenix knows everything," Andrew replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Question is, do we care?" "Not even a little bit," Celeste said, turning to capture his lips in another kiss. Phoenix's voice carried through the door again. "And just so you know, I already posted a TikTok about my aunt finding true love. It's got 500,000 views and counting. You're officially #relationship-goals." Andrew pulled back with a laugh. "Your niece is going to rule the world someday." "Probably," Celeste agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "Good thing she approves of you." As they dressed and prepared to face their new reality as a real couple, Celeste caught sight of herself in Andrew's mirror. The woman looking back at her was radiant, confident, completely at peace with who she'd become. "No regrets?" Andrew asked, appearing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Celeste leaned back against his chest, watching their reflection. Two people who'd found in each other something neither had dared to hope for. "Only that we waited so long," she said. Andrew's laugh rumbled through his chest. "We had to make sure it was real. And now?" "Now," Andrew said, turning her in his arms and looking into her eyes with such love that it took her breath away. "Now we have the rest of our lives to prove it." They walked out to breakfast together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, because they'd learned the most important lesson of all. Real love wasn't about contracts or arrangements or inheritance clauses. It was about choosing each other every day and building something beautiful from that choice. Phoenix looked up from the stove as they entered the kitchen, her knowing grin wider than the Manhattan skyline. "Finally," she declared, flipping a perfect pancake. "I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in a closet together." As Andrew laughed and stole a piece of bacon, while Celeste swatted his hand away, the penthouse filled with the warm sounds of family. Real family, chosen family, the kind built on love rather than obligation. And watching Andrew spin Phoenix around the kitchen while she protested through her giggles, Celeste realized that Eleanor Hawkins's final gift hadn't been an inheritance clause at all. It had been the chance for three people to find each other and build something more valuable than any fortune, a love that would last forever. 3 months later, Phoenix was getting ready for her senior prom when the letter arrived. Celeste recognized Judge Lightfoot's handwriting immediately, but she was unprepared for what she found inside. "What is it?" Andrew asked, looking up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing plans for the Hawkins Foundation, a nonprofit they were launching together to provide financial literacy education in underserved communities. "It's from Eleanor," Celeste said, her voice filled with wonder. "Judge Lightfoot says she left specific instructions for letters to be delivered at certain milestones." Andrew moved to read over her shoulder, his arms encircling her waist, in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The letter was written in Eleanor's elegant script, and even from beyond the grave, her wisdom shone through. "My dear Celeste, if you're reading this, it means my Andrew has found his way to you, and more importantly, you've found your way to each other. I confess I had my eye on you long before Andrew's inheritance deadline became pressing. Professor Meridian spoke of you often, a brilliant student with integrity that couldn't be bought or sold. I chose you not because you needed Andrew's money, but because he needed your strength. Not because you were desperate, but because you were deserving. I knew that any woman who would fight for her niece's future would fight just as fiercely for love, if she found it worthy of the battle. The inheritance was never the prize, my dear. Love was. The kind of love that sees past wealth to worth, that chooses partnership over possession, that builds rather than takes. Welcome to the family, sweetheart. You were always meant to be part of it. With all my love and blessings, Eleanor. P.S. Tell Phoenix I left something special for her 18th birthday. A girl who protects her family so fiercely deserves to know she's protected in return." Celeste felt tears streaming down her cheeks as Andrew's arms tightened around her. "She knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All along, she knew. She chose us," Celeste whispered, leaning back against his chest. "Before we even chose each other." "Smart woman," Phoenix declared from the doorway, stunning in her red prom dress. "I always said she had good taste." As Andrew spun Celeste around the penthouse living room, and Phoenix laughed at their dramatics, Celeste marveled at how perfectly the pieces had fallen into place. A business arrangement had become a love story. A temporary contract had become a lifetime commitment. And three people who'd found each other by chance had become a family by choice. The inheritance clause had done exactly what Eleanor intended. It had brought together two people brave enough to risk their hearts and wise enough to recognize when they'd found something worth keeping. And in the end, that was the greatest fortune of all. But their happiness proved fragile when Dr. Isaiah Crawford returned from Syria 3 weeks before Phoenix's graduation. Celeste's twin brother arrived unannounced at the penthouse. His usually gentle demeanor hardened by months of witnessing war and human suffering. "Celeste," he said, embracing her tightly before stepping back to study Andrew with the clinical assessment of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. "We need to talk." Phoenix threw herself into her uncle's arms with characteristic enthusiasm. "Uncle Isaiah, you're just in time for graduation. Wait until you see the penthouse. It's like living in a palace. And Andrew lets me redecorate whenever I want. And Aunt Celeste is so happy she practically glows." "Phoenix," Isaiah interrupted gently, "could you give your aunt and me a few minutes alone?" Andrew stepped forward, extending his hand. "Dr. Crawford, I've heard so much about your work. Celeste is incredibly proud of you." Isaiah studied Andrew's outstretched hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. "Mr. Hawkins, I appreciate what you've done for my family. But I think we both know this situation is more complicated than it appears." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Celeste felt her stomach twist with familiar anxiety, the same feeling she'd had as a child when teachers would separate her and Isaiah for talking in class, as if their twin connection was somehow inappropriate. "Isaiah," she began, but he held up a hand. "6 months ago, my sister was a respected financial analyst, building her own career. Now she's married to a billionaire she barely knows, living in luxury that could disappear the moment his fancy fades." Isaiah's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much suffering caused by those with power over the powerless. "Forgive me if I'm concerned about how quickly this fairy tale materialized." Andrew's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I understand your concerns." "Do you?" Isaiah's dark eyes flashed. "Do you understand what it's like to watch your sister sacrifice everything for other people's needs? First our parents, then Phoenix, now you? When does Celeste get to put herself first?" "That's enough," Celeste said, sharply moving between the two men she loved most. "Isaiah, I know you're trying to protect me, but I don't need protecting from Andrew. Don't you?" Isaiah pulled out his phone, scrolling to a news article. "Because according to page 6, your husband was seen having dinner with his ex-fiancée 2 nights ago while you were at Phoenix's school play." Celeste felt the blood drain from her face. She turned to Andrew, whose expression had gone carefully blank. The same look he wore in business meetings when he was calculating his next move. "It wasn't what it looked like," Andrew said quietly. "Then what was it?" Isaiah demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my sister got played by a man who knew exactly how desperate she was." "I said that's enough." Celeste's voice cracked like a whip. "Isaiah Crawford, you will not come into my home and accuse my husband of manipulating me. I'm not some fragile victim who needs rescuing." "Your home?" Isaiah's laugh was bitter. "Celeste, this isn't your home. It's his. And the moment he decides he's tired of playing house, you and Phoenix will be back where you started. Except now you'll have gotten used to luxury you can't afford." The words hit like physical blows. Every insecurity Celeste had buried over the past months came roaring back to life. She was living in Andrew's space, dependent on his generosity, vulnerable to his whims. What if Isaiah was right? What if she'd simply traded one form of desperation for another? "I think you should leave," Andrew said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not going anywhere without my sister," Isaiah replied. "Celeste, pack your things. You and Phoenix can stay with me until we figure out how to extricate you from this mess." "There's no mess to extricate her from," Andrew snapped, his careful control finally cracking. "Celeste is my wife. We love each other. This isn't some calculated scheme." "Love?" Isaiah's voice dripped skepticism. "You've known her for 4 months. 4 months, and suddenly you're soulmates? How convenient that this great love story began exactly when you needed a wife to secure your inheritance." Celeste looked between the two men, seeing the pain in Andrew's eyes and the protective fury in Isaiah's, and felt something breaking inside her chest. Because despite everything they built together, despite the love she knew was real, Isaiah's words contained a grain of truth that terrified her. Their relationship had begun as a business transaction. Andrew had needed a wife, she'd needed financial security. The fact that love had grown from those pragmatic roots didn't erase the foundation of mutual need that had brought them together. "Celeste," Andrew said softly, reaching for her hand. You know what we have is real. She looked into his blue eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that her brother's words might be taking root. I know you believe it's real, she said quietly. But Isaiah's right about one thing. I need to be sure I'm not just trading one dependence for another. Andrew's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space to think, to remember who I am when I'm not living in your world. The words felt like swallowing glass, but Celeste forced them out. Maybe it would be better if Phoenix and I stayed with Isaiah for a while. No. The word exploded from Andrew with such force that everyone froze. No, you're not leaving. Not because of him. Not because of doubts that wouldn't exist if he hadn't planted them. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Isaiah said coldly. The moment she tries to exercise independence, you shut it down. This isn't love, Hawkins, it's possession. Andrew turned on Isaiah with fury that made even the experienced surgeon step back. How dare you come into my home and poison what Celeste and I have built? You know nothing about our relationship, about how she saved me from becoming everything I hated about my family's world. And what did you save her from? Isaiah shot back. Poverty? The struggle of building her own life? How noble of you to rescue her from the burden of independence. Stop it, both of you. Phoenix's voice cut through their argument like a blade. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, looking younger than her 16 years. Just stop. You're ruining everything. The three adults turned to stare at her, shocked by the raw pain in her voice. Do you want to know what I think? Phoenix continued, her voice shaking. I think Uncle Isaiah is jealous, because for the first time in our lives, Aunt Celeste has someone else to take care of her. And I think Uncle Andrew is scared, because he knows Uncle Isaiah is right about one thing. He did find us when we were desperate. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of mascara across her cheek. But here's what neither of you seem to understand. Aunt Celeste didn't need saving. She never needed saving. She needed someone who would see how amazing she already was and love her for it. And that's exactly what happened. Phoenix looked directly at Andrew, her young face fierce with protective love. You didn't rescue her, Uncle Andrew. You recognized her. There's a difference. Then she turned to Isaiah, her expression softening with disappointment. And Uncle Isaiah, you're supposed to trust Aunt Celeste's judgment. She spent her whole life making good decisions about what's best for our family. Why would you think she'd suddenly stop now? The room fell silent, except for the sound of Phoenix's ragged breathing. Celeste felt tears streaming down her own face as she realized her 16-year-old niece understood something both men had missed. Phoenix is right, she said quietly. Isaiah, I love you for wanting to protect me, but I don't need protection from my husband. What I need is for my brother to trust that I'm smart enough to know the difference between love and manipulation. She turned to Andrew, whose face was a mask of controlled anguish. And Andrew, I need you to understand that loving someone means trusting them to make their own choices, even when those choices scare you. Isaiah's shoulders sagged as he looked between his sister and Phoenix, seeing the pain his protective instincts had caused. Celeste, in Syria, I saw what happens when people with power take advantage of those without it. I couldn't bear the thought. Andrew doesn't have power over me. Celeste interrupted. We have power with each other. There's a difference. She moved to stand beside Andrew, taking his hand in hers. I'm not staying because I'm dependent on him. I'm staying because I choose him. Every day, the same way he chooses me. Andrew's fingers tightened around hers, and she saw the relief flooding his features. As for dinner with Raven, Celeste continued, looking directly at her husband, I assume there's an explanation that doesn't involve you reconsidering our marriage. Andrew's smile was rueful. She wanted to apologize, said she realized her behavior during the inheritance challenge was unforgivable and wanted to make amends. I met her in a public restaurant, told her I appreciated the apology, but that my life is with you now. End of story. Why didn't you tell me? Celeste asked. Because I didn't want you to worry about something that meant nothing to me, Andrew replied. But I should have realized that secrets, even harmless ones, can look like deception. Isaiah watched this exchange with growing understanding. He saw the way his sister looked at Andrew, not with the desperate gratitude of a rescued woman, but with the steady affection of an equal partner. He saw how Andrew deferred to Celeste's judgment, how he sought her opinion rather than simply providing for her needs. "I owe you both an apology," Isaiah said finally. "Celeste, you're right. You've always made good decisions about our family. I should have trusted you to make good decisions about your own heart." He extended his hand to Andrew, who shook it immediately. "And Andrew, I'm sorry for questioning your motives. Watching my sister glow with happiness should have been proof enough of your character." "You love her," Andrew said simply. "I can't fault you for that. If someone had married Phoenix under similar circumstances, I'd probably react the same way." Phoenix sniffled loudly. "Are we all friends again? Because this emotional roller coaster is exhausting, and I have SAT prep to finish." Despite the tension, all three adults laughed. Phoenix had a gift for cutting through drama with practical concerns that somehow made everything seem manageable again. "We're friends," Celeste assured her, pulling both Andrew and Isaiah into a group hug that Phoenix immediately joined. But even as they reconciled, Celeste couldn't shake the deeper questions Isaiah had raised. Not about Andrew's love, she was certain of that now, but about her own independence, her own identity separate from the roles she'd always played as caretaker and provider. That night, as she and Andrew lay in bed after Isaiah had settled into the guest room, she voiced the concern she couldn't quite silence. "Do you ever worry that I've lost myself in this life?" she asked quietly. Andrew turned to face her in the darkness. "What do you mean?" "I mean, 6 months ago I was fighting to build my own career, to prove my worth professionally. Now I'm basically a kept woman whose biggest accomplishment is helping you optimize your investment portfolio." Andrew was quiet for so long that Celeste wondered if he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Do you remember what you said to Sebastian's lawyer in court? About how I saw past your desperation to your worth?" "Yes." "You were wrong about one thing," Andrew said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "I didn't see past your desperation. I saw through it to your strength. The same strength that's building the Hawkins Foundation curriculum. The same strength that's turning Phoenix into an extraordinary young woman. The same strength that made you brave enough to walk into my office and negotiate the deal that saved us both." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Celeste, you haven't lost yourself in this life. You finally found space to become everything you were meant to be. When life tests your relationships, that's when you discover what's real." If this story is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button and share your own story of love being tested in the comments. As Celeste drifted off to sleep in Andrew's arms, she realized he was right. She hadn't become a different person by loving him. She'd simply become more herself, more confident, more valued, more free to pursue the work that truly mattered to her. But the real test of their love was still coming, and it would require both of them to choose each other over everything else they thought they wanted. The final test came 3 weeks later, on the morning of Phoenix's high school graduation. Celeste was in the kitchen making coffee when Marcus burst through the penthouse doors, his usually composed demeanor shattered. "Mr. Hawkins," he gasped, "you need to see this immediately." Andrew emerged from his study, already dressed in the navy suit Phoenix had helped him choose for her graduation ceremony. "What's wrong?" Marcus handed over his tablet, displaying the morning's financial news. The headline made Celeste's blood run cold. "Hawkins Industries stock plummets as federal investigation reveals massive embezzlement scheme." "What?" Andrew snatched the device, his face growing paler with each line he read. "This can't be right. We don't have any federal investigations." "Keep reading," Marcus said grimly. The article detailed how federal prosecutors had uncovered a complex embezzlement scheme involving several major investment firms, including Morrison & Associates, Celeste's former employer. But the devastating blow came in the final paragraphs, which revealed that the scheme had tentacles reaching into Hawkins Industries through a series of shell companies and fraudulent transactions dating back 3 years. "Douglas Morrison has agreed to cooperate with federal investigators," Andrew read aloud, his voice hollow. "In exchange for reduced charges, he's providing evidence of complicit behavior by executives at Hawkins Industries, including CEO Andrew Hawkins, who allegedly used his relationship with financial analyst Celeste Crawford to gain inside information about Morrison's illegal activities. The tablet slipped from Andrew's nerveless fingers. They're saying I used you, that our entire relationship was orchestrated to commit financial crimes. Celeste felt the world tilting around her. Douglas is lying. I never gave you any information about Morrison's business. I know that, Andrew said quickly. But the timing looks suspicious. You were fired from Morrison and Associates for supposedly exposing their embezzlement. 3 months later, you marry me. Now Morrison is claiming you were actually part of his scheme and that you brought me in as a co-conspirator. Phoenix's voice came from the hallway, uncharacteristically small. What's happening? Why does everyone look like someone died? Isaiah appeared behind her. Having heard the commotion, he took one look at their faces and immediately went into protective mode. Celeste, what's wrong? Andrew's phone began ringing incessantly. Marcus's tablet showed dozens of missed calls from reporters, lawyers, and board members. The carefully constructed life they'd built was crumbling in real time. We need to get ahead of this, Andrew said, his business instincts kicking in. I'll call our legal team. Issue a statement. No. Celeste's voice cut through his planning like a blade. You need to distance yourself from me immediately. What? Andrew stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. Don't you see? Celeste's voice carried a desperate clarity. This is exactly what Douglas wants. He's using our relationship to destroy you. As long as we're married, as long as I'm connected to Hawkins Industries, you'll be vulnerable to these accusations. Celeste. We'll fight this together. No, we won't. She moved away from him, every step feeling like a betrayal of her own heart. I won't let you lose everything because you were kind enough to help me when I was desperate. Isaiah stepped forward, his medical training recognizing the signs of shock and emotional trauma. Celeste, you need to slow down and think clearly. I am thinking clearly, she replied, though tears were streaming down her face. For the first time in months, I'm thinking clearly. Andrew, you need to announce that our marriage was a mistake, that you've discovered I deceived you about my involvement with Morrison's crimes. You need to file for divorce and cut all ties with me. Like hell I will, Andrew said fiercely. I don't care what they're saying. I know who you are, and I know what we have. I'm not abandoning you to save my reputation. Your reputation is the least of our concerns, Celeste shot back. If the federal government believes you're complicit in financial crimes, you could go to prison. Everything Eleanor built, everything you've worked for, will be destroyed. I won't let that happen. Phoenix, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, suddenly exploded. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're going to throw away the best thing that ever happened to either of you because of some lies from a criminal who's trying to save himself. Phoenix, Celeste began. No, Aunt Celeste, I'm talking now. Phoenix's young voice carried authority that silenced the room. Do you remember what you told me when Mom and Dad died? You said that Crawford women don't run from fights, especially when the people we love are counting on us. Phoenix turned to Andrew, her eyes blazing with protective fury. And you, Uncle Andrew, do you remember what you said to me the first night we moved in here? You said that real families stick together when things get difficult, not when they're easy. She looked between them, her teenage wisdom cutting through their adult panic. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to Phoenix Crawford Hawkins' graduation ceremony like the family we are. Then we're going to come home and figure out how to destroy Douglas Morrison before he destroys us. Together. Phoenix, you don't understand the legal implications, Isaiah started. I understand that my aunt and uncle love each other, and that love isn't something you throw away the first time it's tested. Phoenix interrupted. I also understand that Douglas Morrison is counting on us to fall apart, because that's the only way his lies will stick. She grabbed Celeste's hands, forcing her aunt to meet her eyes. Aunt Celeste, you taught me that our worth isn't determined by what other people say about us. It's determined by what we know to be true in our hearts. So what do you know to be true? Celeste looked into Phoenix's earnest face, seeing her own strength reflected back at her. I know that I love Andrew with everything I am. I know that I would never do anything to hurt him or his family. And Uncle Andrew, Phoenix continued, turning to him. What do you know to be true? I know that Celeste is the most ethical person I've ever met, Andrew said, his voice growing stronger. I know that she saved me from becoming someone I hated. And I know that I'd rather face prison with her than freedom without her. Phoenix smiled through her tears. Good. Now can we please go to my graduation? Because I've worked really hard for this moment, and I refuse to let Douglas Morrison ruin it. The graduation ceremony passed in a blur of forced smiles and whispered congratulations. Celeste could feel the weight of stares and whispered speculation from other parents who'd seen the morning news. But when Phoenix's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Andrew reached for Celeste's hand and squeezed it tight. Whatever happens, he murmured, we face it together. That evening, as they sat in the penthouse living room with Isaiah and a team of lawyers, the full scope of Douglas Morrison's scheme became clear. He had indeed been embezzling funds from his clients for years, using a complex network of shell companies to hide the theft. When Celeste had discovered discrepancies in the accounts, Morrison had fired her and begun planning his exit strategy. He's trying to create a narrative where Celeste was his inside accomplice who brought you into the scheme when she married you, their lead attorney explained. It's actually quite clever. It explains away her firing as a lover's quarrel, makes your marriage look like a business conspiracy, and gives him someone to blame for the parts of the scheme that can be traced back to his firm. What's our defense? Andrew asked. The truth, the attorney replied. We can prove that your relationship predated any knowledge of Morrison's crimes. We can show that Celeste's firing was retaliation for her ethical concerns, not part of an elaborate cover-up. And we can demonstrate that your business dealings were completely legitimate. How long will that take? Celeste asked. Months, possibly years. The federal investigation will be thorough, and Morrison will do everything he can to muddy the waters. Isaiah leaned forward. What about Celeste's career? Even if she's cleared of wrongdoing, the association with this scandal could destroy her professional reputation. Actually, one of the junior attorneys spoke up. There might be an opportunity here. If Miss Crawford is willing to cooperate with the federal investigation, she could be positioned as a whistleblower who exposed corporate corruption at great personal cost. That narrative could actually enhance her reputation in the financial industry. Celeste felt something shift inside her chest. For months, she'd been defined by her relationship to Andrew, as his wife, his partner, his beloved. But this crisis was offering her a chance to reclaim her professional identity on her own terms. I want to do it, she said firmly. I want to testify against Morrison and help put him in prison where he belongs. Andrew's hand found hers. Are you sure? The scrutiny will be intense. I'm sure, Celeste replied. Morrison destroyed my career once by lying about my integrity. I won't let him do it again. Over the following weeks, as Celeste worked with federal prosecutors to build their case against Morrison, something unexpected happened. The financial industry began to take notice of the brilliant analyst who had single-handedly uncovered one of the largest embezzlement schemes in recent history. Job offers began pouring in from prestigious firms who wanted to associate themselves with her ethical reputation. You could have your pick of any position in the city, Andrew said one evening, as they reviewed yet another offer. Chief Financial Officer, Managing Director, even starting your own firm. Celeste looked up from the documents, studying her husband's face carefully. Would that bother you, if I had my own career success independent of our marriage? Andrew's smile was radiant. Celeste, watching you reclaim your professional reputation has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. You've reminded me that love isn't about possession or protection. It's about celebrating each other's achievements and supporting each other's dreams. Even if those dreams take me away from the penthouse and back into the corporate world? Especially then, Andrew replied, pulling her into his arms. I fell in love with an extraordinary financial analyst who was fighting to build something meaningful. I'd be devastated if marriage dimmed that fire instead of fueling it. 6 months later, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Celeste Crawford Hawkins was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as the whistleblower who reformed Wall Street. Douglas Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and Celeste's testimony had been instrumental in securing justice for his victims. Phoenix was thriving in her first semester at Columbia, though she still came home every weekend to check on her aunt and uncle. Isaiah had taken a position with Doctors Without Borders based in New York, allowing him to continue his humanitarian work while staying close to family. And Andrew had proposed to Celeste again, not with a contract this time, but with a ring and a promise to love her, whether she was a desperate woman needing help or a successful executive who could buy her own penthouse. You know, Celeste said as they danced at their real wedding ceremony, a small, intimate affair with only family and close friends. Eleanor's inheritance clause was supposed to teach you about finding real love. It did, Andrew replied, spinning her around the dance floor. But I think it taught you something too. What's that? Andrew's eyes sparkled with love and admiration. That you don't have to choose between being independent and being loved. The right person will celebrate your strength, not try to diminish it. As they swayed together to music played by a string quartet in Eleanor's garden, surrounded by people who loved them for exactly who they were, Celeste realized that her grandmother-in-law's final gift hadn't been the inheritance clause that brought them together. It had been the wisdom to understand that real love doesn't rescue you from your life. It empowers you to build the life you've always wanted. And with Andrew's arms around her and Phoenix's laughter echoing through the garden as she danced with Isaiah, Celeste knew she had built something extraordinary indeed. Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected circumstances. Have you ever found love or friendship where you least expected it? Share your story below, and don't forget to join us tomorrow for another tale of the heart that will remind you that love always finds a way. Eleanor Grace stirred in her father's arms, making the soft cooing sounds that never failed to melt both her parents' hearts. Watching Andrew's gentle smile as he adjusted their daughter's position, Celeste felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life they'd built together. 18 months later, Celeste stood in the boardroom of Crawford Hawkins Financial Consulting, the firm she'd built from the ground up after her Forbes cover story had made her the most sought-after ethical financial consultant in the country. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Central Park, where Andrew was pushing their 6-month-old daughter, Eleanor Grace, in her stroller while pointing out the ducks on the pond. "Aunt Celeste, are you even listening to me?" Phoenix's voice carried the fond exasperation of someone who'd caught her mentor daydreaming. At 18, Phoenix had grown into a stunning young woman who managed to balance her freshman year at Columbia with running the social media empire she'd built around financial literacy for young people. "Sorry, sweetheart," Celeste replied, turning back to the presentation Phoenix was giving to the Crawford Hawkins Foundation board. "You are explaining the new scholarship program?" "The Eleanor Hawkins Scholarship for Ethical Leadership," Phoenix corrected with a grin. "We're targeting first-generation college students who demonstrate both academic excellence and moral courage, like a certain financial analyst who once risked everything to expose corporate corruption." Isaiah, now the foundation's medical advisor, while maintaining his humanitarian work, smiled from across the conference table. "Phoenix has already identified 50 candidates for the first round of scholarships. The selection criteria are impressive." "Speaking of impressive," Andrew said as he entered the boardroom carrying Eleanor Grace, whose tiny hands were waving excitedly at everyone in the room. "Our daughter just charmed every person in Central Park. I'm starting to think she inherited more than just her great-grandmother's name." Eleanor Grace, with her mother's intelligent brown eyes and her father's devastating smile, gurgled happily and reached for Celeste with chubby baby arms. "Just like her great-grandmother," Celeste said, accepting her daughter's enthusiastic baby babble and tiny grasping hands. "Eleanor always said leadership was about inspiring others to follow you willingly." Phoenix gathered her presentation materials with practiced efficiency. "I should get back to campus. Professor Martinez is expecting my economics paper by tomorrow, and I still need to record 3 TikToks about compound interest." "The glamorous life of a social media mogul and law student," Isaiah teased, ruffling his niece's hair affectionately. "Someone has to teach our generation that money is a tool, not a goal," Phoenix replied seriously. "Besides, I learned from the best." She looked between Celeste and Andrew with obvious affection. "You two taught me that real wealth comes from building something meaningful with people you love." After Phoenix left for Columbia and Isaiah departed for his evening clinic, Celeste found herself alone with Andrew and Eleanor Grace in the foundation offices. Their daughter had fallen asleep in Andrew's arms, exhausted from her afternoon of charming strangers in the park. "Do you ever miss it?" Andrew asked quietly, settling into the chair beside Celeste's desk. "The simplicity of our early days, when it was just business arrangements and separate bedrooms?" Celeste laughed softly, careful not to wake Eleanor Grace. "Are you serious? I lived in constant fear that you'd realize I wasn't sophisticated enough for your world. I wore the same 3 suits on rotation and calculated grocery expenses down to the penny. I was terrified you'd realize I was just a spoiled rich boy playing at being a businessman," Andrew admitted. "I kept waiting for you to see through the expensive suits to the insecure man underneath." And now, Andrew's gaze moved from their sleeping daughter to Celeste's face, and the love there was so deep and steady it still took her breath away. "Now I know that the best things in life aren't about having everything figured out. They're about finding someone brave enough to figure it out with you." Eleanor Grace stirred in her father's arms, mumbling something about duckies in her sleep. Watching Andrew's gentle smile as he adjusted their daughter's position, Celeste felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life they'd built together. "The inheritance clause expires next month," she said quietly. 1 year of marriage, fulfilled 5 times over. "Think Eleanor knew we'd make it this far?" Andrew asked. "I think Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that clause," Celeste replied. "She wasn't testing whether you could find a wife. She was testing whether you could recognize a partner." Andrew leaned over to kiss her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and determination that had captivated him from their first meeting. "Best business deal I ever made." "It stopped being business the moment you descended me to Raven," Celeste said. "That's when I knew you saw me as more than a solution to your problems." "You were never a solution to my problems," Andrew replied seriously. "You were the answer to questions I didn't even know I was asking. What does it feel like to be truly known? What does it mean to build something lasting? What is love when it's stripped of everything superficial?" Eleanor Grace chose that moment to wake up, blinking sleepily at her parents with the devastating smile she'd inherited from her father, then making the soft baby sounds that indicated she was ready for her evening bottle. "Just like her great-grandmother," Andrew said with a laugh. Eleanor never hesitated to make her demands known either. As they gathered their things to head home for dinner, Celeste caught sight of the portrait Judge Lightfoot had given them last Christmas. Eleanor Hawkins, at age 35, standing in the same foundation offices where she'd started her legal aid clinic for underprivileged families. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Celeste asked, studying Eleanor's determined expression. "I think she'd be amazed," Andrew replied, following her gaze. "She hoped the inheritance clause would teach me about love. She never imagined it would create a family legacy that would impact thousands of people." The Crawford Hawkins Foundation had grown far beyond their initial financial literacy programs. They now funded medical missions, educational scholarships, legal aid clinics, and ethical leadership training. What had started as Eleanor's test for her grandson had become a force for positive change that would outlast them all. "Ready to go home?" Andrew asked, settling Eleanor Grace on his shoulders for the walk to their car. Home was no longer the penthouse, though they'd kept it for entertaining. Instead, they'd bought Eleanor's townhouse from the estate and restored it to reflect both its historical significance and their modern family's needs. It was where Eleanor Grace would grow up, surrounded by books, art, and the kind of love that had nothing to do with bank accounts. As they walked through Central Park in the golden evening light, Eleanor Grace making happy baby sounds from her stroller and pointing with chubby fingers at every duck and squirrel they passed, Celeste reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The desperate woman who'd walked into Andrew's office with a business proposition had evolved into someone she barely recognized, confident, successful, deeply loved, and secure in ways that had nothing to do with financial security. "Penny for your thoughts," Andrew said, noticing her contemplative mood. "Just thinking about how Eleanor's inheritance clause gave us everything except what we thought we wanted," Celeste replied. "I thought I wanted financial security. You thought you wanted to preserve family wealth. Instead, we got something infinitely more valuable." "What's that?" Celeste looked at their daughter, chattering happily about the day's adventures, then at her husband, whose love had taught her that she was worthy of being cherished exactly as she was. "We got to become the people we were meant to be," she said simply. "Together." Andrew stopped the stroller and pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness that had characterized their love story from the beginning. Eleanor Grace gurgled happily from her stroller, waving her tiny hands at her parents' display of affection. As they continued toward home, Celeste realized that Eleanor Hawkins's greatest gift hadn't been the inheritance that secured Andrew's future or the clause that brought them together. It had been the wisdom to understand that real love multiplies rather than divides, that true wealth comes from what you build rather than what you inherit, and that the most valuable legacy anyone can leave is a family built on authentic love and shared purpose. The inheritance clause had served its purpose and more. What remained was a love story that would inspire generations to come, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, chosen daily, and built on the radical idea that two people brave enough to be vulnerable with each other can create something extraordinary. And in the end, that was the greatest fortune of all. Sometimes love finds us when we're not looking for it, disguised as something practical and safe. But the most beautiful relationships are the ones that begin with honest need and grow into something neither person could have imagined alone. Celeste and Andrew discovered that true partnership isn't about rescuing each other. It's about recognizing the strength that was always there and choosing to build something extraordinary together. Their story reminds us that the best inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in the love we choose to create and the legacy we leave for those who come after us. Eleanor's inheritance clause didn't just secure a fortune. It secured a future filled with authentic love, purposeful work, and a family bound not by obligation, but by the daily choice to see the best in each other. Have you ever found love or friendship in the most unexpected circumstances? Sometimes the universe has plans for us that we never could have imagined. Share your own story of unexpected love in the comments below. We'd love to hear how life surprised you with exactly what you needed, even when you thought you knew what you wanted. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love, family, and the beautiful ways our lives can change when we're brave enough to be vulnerable. Tomorrow, I'll share another story that proves love really can conquer all. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining Celeste, Andrew, Phoenix, and little Eleanor Grace on their journey. Until next time, remember that the greatest adventures often begin with the words, "I have a proposition for you."